It was almost real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast, episode 79. Hello and welcome to this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to the history of professional wrestling from 1870 to 1930, when it was almost real. My name is Ken Zimmerman Jr., and I'll be flying solo this week as I talk about a contest from 1884, which wasn't much of a contest, between current world champion William Muldoon and a local wrestler. But first, I wanted to share my thoughts on the premium live event, Elimination Chamber 2025, which aired on Peacock in the United States this past Saturday. And while I don't know how many spoilers I'm going to give away as I just share my general impressions, this is definitely not going to be a review. I will say that if you haven't watched the event and you're worried about hearing something that might spoil it for you, just pause the show, go watch the event, and then you can come back and listen to my thoughts on it. But I will start by saying that this is the first pay-per-view during the Triple H Paul Levesque era, which I thought was a big disappointment. It was 4 matches long, and fortunately I was working on my book, so I just kind of had it on in the background. I only stopped to really watch the last match, which I enjoyed until the finish, and the finish completely ruined it for me. So I'll just say that this was the most disappointing premium live event under the Paul Levesque era, and I am not looking forward to WrestleMania at all. I will watch main event Jey Uso in his match with Gunther, and I will probably watch anything that has to do with Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, CM Punk, and Drew McIntyre. The rest of the card, I'm just going to give it a miss. Not excited at all for the main event that was decided yesterday, but I'll save that for last since that was the 4th match. This was a 4-match card. It started out with the Ladies Elimination Chamber match. It featured the return of someone who, in storyline, to cover their injury, had been jumped in the back. This babyface, and I'll put babyface in quotation marks, came out to extract revenge before the match even started with who we're supposed to believe was the perpetrator of the attack now. But this was the most heelish comeback attack from a babyface I have ever seen. Now, I guess it was successful as the fans cheered the person being carted off with na 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 na, na 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 na, hey hey hey, goodbye. You actually, if you were a caring person, you probably would feel sorry for the person that just got beat unmercifully in what looked like a basic heel attack. And this was from a returning babyface. So that set the tone for the night. The match after that was a bit disjointed. It was hard to follow how the match opened. I can't complain about the winner, and I think it sets up what will be a very good match between the winner and Rhea Ripley at WrestleMania. But depending on what they do between now and then, probably not one I'm going to watch. The second match actually was probably the best match on the card, and it's the one I had the absolute least amount of hope going into. And that was Candice LeRae and Nia Jax versus Trish Stratus and Tiffany Stratton. And I thought the match ended as it should. It put the right person over leading into WrestleMania. And there was nothing that was in this match that was off-putting, would turn you off. And I've been pretty critical of Nia Jax in the past, but I thought she did well here. The third match, and I have criticized AEW for this repeatedly, so WWE is going to get the exact same thing. Had I been interested enough to watch this match, because I knew it was going to be a garbage match since it was unsanctioned, and Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens don't have to do garbage matches anymore, just like Jon Moxley and Adam Copeland, but they did it anyway. And what did they pull out midway through this match? A chair wrapped in barbed wire. I thought it was absolutely stupid when AEW did it, and I think it's equally stupid when WWE does it. This match, if it had been just a wrestling match, with them getting pretty aggressive with each other, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. But with all the furniture and everything that we have to introduce into these matches, we've seen this all a million times. Great return at the end of this match, though, and happy to see that person back. And then finally the main event, which had 6 big-name stars in it, was a good match for the most part. But the ending, not the ending of the match, but the ending of the night, to me, completely took the wind out of anything that they were trying to do. It doesn't make any sense. And this is something a couple of legends who are well, and I mean well past their primes, talked the company into doing. And it cheated us out of main events that I would have much rather seen, with current wrestlers who were active all the time and who have ongoing storylines with Cody. There were several that you could have got out of this. The one they went with, of course, was to try to pull at the heartstrings of the fans, and then they completely flipped that around, and I'm sure they thought, ooh, this is going to be a great surprise. It was a surprise. I don't think it was great, and I think the two people involved need to quit watching the old reruns of The Sopranos. To quote the old Living Color show, hated it. I'm going to jump, I think, now into the history topic, now that I've vented my spleen. Less said, quickest mended, I guess, so maybe we'll just move on from that topic. So the topic I had for this week for the history segment, and the next episode, I think, is going to be me and Dan, and I think the episode after that is going to be the Iron Claw, because the boys watched the Iron Claw this past weekend. So we're going to share our thoughts on that probably in about 2 weeks, but it could be 3 weeks depending on what I record in between, because I'm kind of trying to get ahead on my single episodes. So I've got a couple saved, and I can pop them in at any time if I can't coordinate the schedule with Dan or Caleb and Trey. But the topic I wanted to talk about this week was William Muldoon, the undisputed world heavyweight Greco-Roman wrestling champion from 1880 to 1889. Now realize there was no world catch-as-catch-can champion at the time. There were a couple of people that tried to get recognition for something like that. Edwin Bibby and Joe Acton. But that was always recognized as the American title, which was the dominant catch wrestling championship, until Frank Gotch beat George Hackenschmidt in the first match in Chicago in 1908. So in the 1880s in the United States, there were a whole lot of different styles, but the dominant style was Greco-Roman wrestling, and that was why the World Championship matches were contested in Greco-Roman wrestling, but catch wrestling was quickly catching up with it, particularly after the emergence of Evan Strangler Lewis in 1887. Muldoon would never wrestle Lewis in a catch match, and Muldoon was barely able to beat Lewis in the Greco-Roman wrestling matches, which were not Lewis's specialty. In 1880s, Greco-Roman is the dominant style. Muldoon is not only a tremendous Greco-Roman wrestler, but he is also a proponent of physical culture. So physical culture is what, in the 1800s, very early 1900s, that's people that were into bodybuilding, lifting weights, that was called physical culture back then. And it wasn't just lifting weights. It was a combination of lifting weights, cycling, gymnastics, and often wrestling and or boxing. Wrestling was almost always part of the curriculum. Boxing became more and more part of the curriculum, particularly after the bare-knuckle boxing days ended, and it went almost all to gloved boxing competitions. And that's how Muldoon started. Well, it's not how Muldoon actually was wrestling as a drummer boy in the Civil War, but he started wrestling professionally out of some of the physical culture clubs up in New York. He was a detective for the New York City Police Department. He also trained, did physical culture, and wrestled in the gyms, and he started wrestling professionally. In 1880, he wins the recognized World Heavyweight Greco-Roman Wrestling Championship in a contest, but realized too that, I don't know why I keep saying but realized too, it's like I'm trying to be a college professor today. When Muldoon won this title, the two people that had held it before him, Theobald Bauer and Andre Crystal, worked a lot of their championship matches. When they wrestled Muldoon, it was a contest, and not they, but when Theobald Bauer wrestled Muldoon beat him in a contest. And Muldoon wrestled quite a few contests. He wrestled more contests than he worked matches, but he did work matches. He worked matches with Sorikichi Matsuda. He worked matches with Clarence Whistler, and they also had some very long, boring contests as well between the two of them. But Muldoon, being a physical culture advocate, learning that he also had an ability to train. So a lot of people that are at the top of their profession can't teach. But Muldoon, even though he was at top of his profession in wrestling, found out that he could teach as well. He would train people occasionally, and he developed his own method of training. While he was world champion, he started going around having, they weren't exhibition matches because they were contests, but he would go to a town, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and he would schedule a match with a local wrestler. A lot of times it wasn't for the world title because the person was so lightly known, nobody was going to really pay to come out and see just that match. But what he would do was he would give demonstrations of physical culture and lecture on his method of training, and who he would invite to these matches would be like the businessmen in town and the politicians, people with money who led sedentary lifestyles. And Muldoon was hoping to attract those clients to his physical training business after he retired from wrestling. Muldoon wrestled for 9 years, he wrestled more than that, but he was the undefeated world champion for 9 years, from 1880 to 1889. During that time, he also was touring vaudeville, so he would not be defending the title every month while he was champion. He would defend for a while, then he would go on these, it was an early version of vaudeville, but it wasn't vaudeville yet. They were called traveling minstrel shows, but they kind of went on the theater circuit like vaudeville would do. And so he would be touring, and he would tour with some of the wrestlers that he wrestled legitimate contests with and worked while he was doing this. And he also would give these demonstrations because he was planning for his life after wrestling. Who knew a wrestling career was not going to be very long, so he wanted to be able to have something that he could do when he retired from wrestling. And in 1880, when he won the title, he was 29 years old. So when he retired, he was 38 years old. Muldoon in 1984 schedules a match with a local wrestler named Fred Bauer, and they have it at the Turnavarian Hall in Los Angeles. Now, Turners were a society of German physical culturists. The big German immigration happened during the 19th century in the 1800s. A lot of the German communities, when they came here, founded Turnavarian halls where they would practice bodybuilding or weight training, gymnastics, cycling, boxing, and wrestling. They would do all of those at these Turnavarian halls. St. Louis, where I grew up at, had two Turnavarian halls, one on the north side, one on the south side. The south side one still exists today. It is a apartment building. They rehabbed it into an apartment building. The north side Turnavarian Hall, unfortunately, was neglected, and it was beyond repair about 10 years ago, and they finally tore it down. But this is a Turnavarian Hall in Los Angeles. And Muldoon invites a lot of the local businessmen, political leaders, and sporting men to come to this match that he's going to have with the local Los Angeles wrestler named Fred Bauer. And they have this match on Tuesday, April 15th, 1884. So you know it's on a Tuesday. More than likely you're going to attract mostly businessmen that can make their own schedule, because someone who is working the long hours that they would have to work back in the 1880s is not going to be able to go to the wrestling match on Tuesday night and get up for work on Wednesday morning, unless they're very, very dedicated fans. Muldoon was so confident of a victory over Bauer that he said that he would throw Bauer 10 times in 1 hour or he would concede the match to Bauer. So 10 times in an hour is a significant accomplishment, particularly when the other person can just wrestle defensively, just try to keep you from throwing them. Unfortunately for Bauer, he was in way over his head physically. So Muldoon weighed a muscular 200 pounds for this match at 6 foot 1 inches tall. Bauer weighed 235 pounds, so he outweighs Muldoon by 35 pounds, but it's not muscle. And he stands only 5 feet 9 inches tall. After some preliminary instructions, the referee tells him, okay, go ahead and lock up. Muldoon grabs Bauer by the arms and throws him in less than a minute. Now, there's normally like a 10-minute intermission between falls, but Bauer is so incensed that he was pinned so quickly that he gets up and runs at Muldoon. So Muldoon just catches him in mid-rush, lifts him high in the air, and slams him flat on his back for the second fall in just 15 seconds. And normally this would not count because the referee would have said, you guys need to separate. But the referee was like, yeah, okay, that's the second fall. As Bauer laid on the mat saying something like, oh, God. Bauer crawls off the mat this time and decides, hey, I'm going to take the 10-minute intermission. So he comes back for the third fall, which Muldoon takes in 30 seconds. So Bauer's doing better. Instead of getting thrown in 15 seconds, it took 30 seconds this time. So he's doubled the amount of time it's taken Muldoon to throw him. After the third fall, Bauer was so disappointed he was thinking about quitting. And Muldoon gave him extra time on the intermission so that he could flex for the audience and describe some of the benefits of exercise and nutrition and the system that he was going to talk to them about after this match ended. The longer intermission between falls ends. Bauer gets up. Muldoon throws him 2 more times in a couple of minutes. So Bauer's improving with each time, but it's only taking him a minute to throw him instead of 15 seconds. But this is not going to be enough time that Muldoon is not going to score all 10 falls within that hour. Bauer just like, okay, he's got 5 falls on me already. He's done that in about 6 or 7 minutes. I'm just going to call it a day. And his friends say, no, you can't do that. You got to at least stay the 10 falls. So he reluctantly goes back out there. He should have followed his own instincts, because when he went back out for the 6th fall, Muldoon picks him up and throws him to the carpet or the mat so hard that Bauer is knocked senseless. And at this point, the referee steps in and says, okay, the match is over. He can't continue. This is done. Muldoon now has won the match and proceeds to go into a physical culture lecture for all the businessmen that are there. His whole purpose is he's trying to get, it would be early mail order correspondence courses. He's trying to teach them his method, and then he's going to correspond with them on their training. They'll write him letters and that, and he'll send them back, and they'll pay him a certain amount of money. This business will eventually become his main business in the early 1890s when he buys a farm in New York called Olympus, and he starts training athletes, businessmen, and politicians. Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president from 1901 to 1908, sent many of his cabinet members to Muldoon to get back in shape because the sedentary nature of their work left them really out of shape. Thing that put Muldoon on the map as a trainer of athletes was the training he did of John L. Sullivan, who was at the time, the world bare-knuckle prize fighting champion heavyweight. And he was getting ready for a fight with Jake Kilrain in New Orleans, which was one of the toughest fights he would ever have in his career. John L. Sullivan was a heavy, heavy drinker, and he would get out of training and out of shape in between fights. So when Muldoon started training him, Sullivan, who fought best around 190 pounds, was well north of 220 or 230, woefully out of shape, and would have stood no chance against Kilrain. Muldoon trains Sullivan, gets him in shape, and Sullivan actually wins the fight that goes 80 rounds in almost 3 hours and 45 minutes. In the bare-knuckle prize fighting days, a round ended when someone was knocked down, someone took a knee, or someone was thrown. So you could have a round that went 10 minutes. If nobody fell, nobody was thrown, nobody took a knee. And this match, I can't remember the number of rounds anymore. It's been a while. I think it was 75 to 80. The fight lasted 3 hours and 45 minutes. So imagine two bare-knuckle boxers fighting for 3 hours and 45 minutes. You got 30 seconds between rounds, and then you had to be back at the scratch, which was the center of the ring, with your hands up ready to fight, or the fight was over. So with 30 seconds in between rounds, that's how long those guys fought. I've got one or two more things that I want to cover, and then I will bid adieu for this week. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a history lesson of Muldoon and how he spread his system of physical training. William Muldoon was the first pro wrestling book that I wrote, and it probably goes as heavy into his system of physical culture and training because he wrestled so infrequently. A lot of the wrestlers in the 1880s, they could go months between matches. It was not unusual for them to have 6-9 matches in a year, and they may have 3 or 4 of them in a bunch. So it was a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of inactivity, and he filled that time with his physical culture training and the other business, or the touring with the minstrel shows. So his other business ventures took up as much, if not more, of his time than his professional wrestling career, even though he was the defending world champion. I made a couple of decisions this week. I'm hoping one doesn't negatively affect my relationship with my readers, because I decided to leave Twitter this past week, or X, whatever you prefer to call it. I really enjoyed that platform because I met a lot of great wrestling fans on it. Some of the people that I would communicate with a lot, I met on that platform. There have been it's always been kind of a toxic environment outside of the wrestling community. Well, inside the wrestling community it can be too. I've always found it to be a bit of a toxic platform. And I don't get into politics, particularly not on the show, because I think people want to get away from that. I just can't ignore all the things that are going on in the world as well. And there are just things and people I would prefer not to be a part of. I had been thinking about leaving Twitter or X for about the last 2 years. And I decided this week, it's time to make that decision. I still have a Facebook page. I'm on LinkedIn. And you can always send me an email through the website, kenzimmermanjr.com. You can find the show notes for this episode and all episodes at kenzimmermanjr.com. And the show notes for this episode will be kenzimmermanjr.com/episode 79. The other thing that I have done is I am switching web hosts. Since I have been having my own author website since 2013, I have been with the same hosting company. And each year, their fees continue to get higher, and the upselling is constant. And besides the fact that the prices go up every time I renew, go up substantially every time I renew, my website has been down for 5 to 8 minutes at least once a month for the past 4 or 5 months. So I tend to be a loyal person. I don't like to switch from people I've done business with and been happy with in the past, but it just got to a point where I had to look at other options. So you shouldn't notice anything with the website other than maybe it'll be a little faster when you come to it. But I will be switching web hosts in March, and it should improve the performance of the site. And then finally, I have my recommendation this week, but it is not in the pro wrestling venue. I started watching a show on Netflix this past week, and I've already finished the first season of it. Number one, I don't have that much time, so it's very unusual for me to binge watch a show for more than a couple episodes at a time. But I had some time with my grandsons the other day where I really couldn't do much else but watch something on my computer, and I started watching this show. And over about 3 days, I managed to get through the first season. Now, the episodes are like 40 to 50 minutes, and the last 5 minutes is credits that you can skip over to go to the next episode. But the name of the show is called Night Agent. For a guy that got his degree in political science and used to be interested in following politics, it's a very good show. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised because most of the time I think most modern shows probably aren't going to be that good if they're popular, and this was highly rated, so I was hesitant to watch it. But I saw enough previews that looked interesting to me. I said, well, you know what, I'll give it a try. And I did find it to be very interesting. Night Agent is my recommendation. I'll probably have a book recommendation for the next podcast episode because I'm finishing a book, and I'm getting ready to start a pro wrestling related book, and I'll talk about that in the next episode. If you have any questions or comments about any episode or any post on the website, you can go to kenzimmerjr.com. There's a contact me page, and you can send me an email. Happy to hear from you. Just be patient on the return because sometimes it takes me a little bit to get back to everybody, but I will eventually get back to everybody. And until next week, everybody, hope you enjoyed this little shorter episode. Take care. Bye-bye.